Thanks for joining us today. My name is Vanessa Hausman. I recognize some of your names as having worked with you on your study abroad plans. Some of you may have worked with Ellie and Maureen, who are my two colleagues in the Office of International Programs. And I'm here today with Sherry Rice from the Business Career Center. Sherry's waving at you if you want to introduce yourself too, maybe Sherry.
Hi everyone, I'm Sherry. I work in the Business Career Center, as Vanessa said. I'm really excited to talk to all of you a little bit on how to market your study abroad experiences. But in the Business Career Center, my biggest job is making sure all of you know how to communicate with employers and all of the different ways that you would be doing that. So I'm excited to be able to talk to you a little bit about how you can tie that into your study abroad experience.
Sherry's going to help you all get jobs, which is really why you're here after all. Anyway, so we'll get started a little bit talking about study abroad specifically. And I think, Sherry, I think you said you have to control the slides. Okay. All right, so we always sort of want to start off by saying that the fact that you studied abroad really isn't all that impressive by itself, which isn't to scare you and say that studying abroad wasn't impressive, but that it's really up to you to flesh out a little bit what it is that you got out of this experience, some of the skills and attributes that you've been developing, and why this is going to benefit an employer. And so this is something that's really, I think, up to each and every one of you to think back about why you chose to study abroad, what your experience was actually like, and how you're going to be able to draw this into something that recruiters will see as a positive attribute in you. So we're going to sort of take you through a few reflection exercises just to kind of get your brains thinking. And then Sherry will talk to you a little bit more about sort of the recruiting side, but I want to just kind of get you guys started with some questions to think back on your study abroad experiences. All right, I'd like to remind students to really think about what you did and what you experienced. So many students do study abroad these days that it's easy to fall into the trap about what study abroad students in general do. But in fact, each and every one of you had very individual and particular experiences, especially this year. We'll talk a little bit more about COVID in a minute. But do sort of think back on your actual personal experiences, sort of going into this. How much experience did you have with traveling ahead of time? Did you know what you were going to face while you were abroad? Was it all a surprise? Was it all something new and life-changing? Did you actually learn something significant about yourself? Some students come back and they feel like, whoa, that totally changed who I am and what I want to get out of life. And so if that's the case for you, do sort of think about that, and if there's something that you can draw from that experience. Any particular moments where you were able to grow and change, not just the whole experience sort of as a whole, but was there one particular day or one particular challenge, one particular professor that really shaped the experience overall? And then any special activities, extracurriculars. If any of you did part-time internships while you were abroad, those are always excellent sources of stories for recruiting. Any groups that you might have joined, any extracurriculars that you took advantage of, sort of especially while you're abroad, are good to highlight. So just sort of to yourselves, we will try to do a group activity later, but just kind of think to yourself a little bit what skills you think you might have developed through study abroad.
And just a really quick note, I think we forgot to mention this. If you do have questions throughout, please feel free to unmute yourself or put something in the chat. You are able to kind of unmute and ask any questions, or there's a question answer feature. So if there's anything that comes up throughout, please let us know.
Yeah, I think Sherry upgraded you all to panelists, so you've got the control. All right, so next, think a little bit about too what your story that you want to tell through study abroad is. And so a lot of times when you come home from your experiences and you're talking to your friends and you're talking to your families, it's sort of easy to stay on the superficial topics, and you tell them it was awesome and I traveled to all these places and I got to go to the Alps and we went skiing and we went to so many different cities. In your cases, you might talk a little bit about, oh my gosh, I had to come home. But all of these different stories really aren't going to be enough to just kind of glimpse the surface. You need to actually connect these to the skills and the attributes that you're trying to highlight to a recruiter. And so you don't want to waste the opportunity when a recruiter asks you, tell me about your study abroad experience, to just say, yeah, it was awesome, I really liked it a lot. Because there's so much more that you can highlight and emphasize about the skills and attributes you're gaining. And so we want you to make the most of these connections and really use your stories to tell that study abroad growth story that you've had. one sort of image that I found particularly striking when we were starting to put together this workshop, there was a Finnish university that put together this study. And so, of course, we think of study abroad as American students going to Europe, but in fact, even European students will travel around. And I'm sure you encountered students from other European countries who were studying abroad in Spain for a semester, in the UK for a semester. So this Finnish university was trying to figure out what competencies their students were coming home from with having developed during study abroad. And sort of the tip of the iceberg that everyone says, oh yeah, these are, every kid comes home and they've got improved language skills and they've got improved tolerance and they've got more cultural knowledge, they've learned something about a different culture, was what everyone sort of assumed was the minimum or the maximum even that these students had gained. But as they interviewed the students, talked to them, listened to their stories, and sort of really dug in deeper, they found that their students were coming home after a semester abroad with increased productivity, much more curiosity, and a big improvement in their resilience and tolerance. And so that's something that, again, for you to think about what you've gained out of this. Of course, you've got sort of that tip of the iceberg skills that you've all developed, but if you sort of dig a little bit deeper, you might find that your curiosity and your resilience has improved. And you need to highlight these to the recruiters as you talk to them, because they're not going to see them as being so obvious. You're the one who's going to have to make that connection for them and say, hey, here's how this experience has helped me become a more curious person, because I've been exposed to other viewpoints, to other perspectives, and now I want to learn more about the world and something sort of that ties in and relates. So the image, like I said, was what I found was kind of the striking tip of the iceberg versus the deeper skills that you have. We also wanted to take a second and kind of address the elephant in the room, which is that your study abroad semester, I'm assuming at this point all of you here were spring 2020 students, but if any of you were in other semesters, this might not apply. But that, of course, COVID-19 has played a big role in your experience and sort of bringing you home sooner than you had anticipated, but also just the challenges that everyone has faced with sort of being shuffled to the home environment, kind of being a little bit on lockdown, finishing your classes on Zoom. And so something that I would like each of you maybe to take a couple minutes right now. First of all, think back on your time when you were actually abroad and some of the memories that actually brought you joy, because you did have significant study abroad experiences, despite the fact that they were cut short. We do want you to think back on this time and think about all of the good things that came out of it and what you're grateful for from the experience. But then also thinking back to this sort of aspect of being pulled suddenly from your program and having to come home, what was the most challenging part of that? Some of you might have had difficulties with finding flights home. Some of you might have found a flight very easily, but you struggled with maintaining relationships with the people that you had met during your stay in your host country and wanting to keep up those relationships when you came home. So each of you will have a little bit of a different sort of most challenging aspect. So do think a little bit about that and try to see what stands out to you. And what lessons and what skills did you learn from facing this challenge? Because I think a lot of employers, when they're talking to you, Sherry will kind of talk a little bit about this, are looking for you to talk about some of your challenges and some of your weaknesses and some of the struggles that you faced and how you've grown and how you've learned from those. And so I think taking the time to reflect on this right now will be something that is helpful as you move forward now through this recruiting phase and having stories that are readily available.
All right, so we're gonna pass the torch a little bit and move a little bit into, Vanessa did a really great job of kind of going in and thinking about and reflecting on those experiences that you've been able to have in study abroad, in study abroad. And one of the best ways that you're gonna be able to start to showcase the employer that experience is through a resume. So what we have up here is a chart that is actually how employers kind of identify the different components that they're looking for to see what skill sets that students have developed from a multitude of different experiences. So obviously, employers are definitely looking at majors. There are certain, majors that are required for certain positions. So that tends to be, something that's a default of, I need to make sure that a student has the major. They like to see students that are in leadership positions, co-curricular activities, being involved outside of your academics. GPA is definitely a factor. You do want to see that you can maintain those high scores in a GPA over a 3.0 to make sure that you can understand and comprehend knowledge, because when you go into an internship or into a job, I need to make sure that you have those comprehension skills, that those things that I'm going to teach you, you're going to be able to maintain. School attendant can be an attribute. I will say that Penn State is a target school for a lot of different companies and organizations. We're lucky in that. So sometimes having that Penn State on your resume does help. Volunteer work, foreign language skills, but then also they do look at study abroad experiences. Employers do see that as a valuable experience, but as Vanessa said, you have to kind of pull out what you were really able to gain from that experience to showcase them why it was valuable. I think it's about 1/3 of Penn State SMEAL students go study abroad. So if you think about that, all of them turn into alumni, and they end up potentially recruiting and working with you as individuals, as professionals. And so they also can connect with you on those experiences. A lot of times when you talk to employers and you say, I studied abroad in XYZ, you know, a recruiter might say, oh, I studied abroad here. And you can build in on that connection. So, you know, it is something where you can build that connection, but you do have to kind of, again, wheel them in with why that's important.
And Sherry, if I could just sort of interject for a second, you might also encounter recruiters who have not studied abroad and don't necessarily have that personal experience with sort of the impact that it can have on a student. And so then you're going to have to try doubly hard to really convince them about the value that you got out of this, because they're not going to automatically have that connection to the experience. And it'll be even more important for you to really highlight the sort of the foundational skills that you're gaining through this.
Definitely. Great, great addition there, Vanessa, as that is definitely accurate, because if they think that you're just going on vacation for 3 months, that may for them, for those employers that maybe don't understand, they might need a little more guidance on that. Okay, so I have an activity for all of you. I believe you should be able to, and I'm not sure if you can see it, you should be able to go to Poll Everywhere, to that link that's listed at the bottom. And I want you all to write in what you guys think are your top skills for employers that they look for in candidates. You can do it through your phone, on the website, whatever it may be. But I want you to go ahead and take a minute and kind of think, what do you guys think employers are looking for?
Sherry, I'm not seeing like a specific link.
You're not seeing the link?
No, it just says get help at pollev.com.
Oh no, hang on one second. No, this is why technology, no. Okay.
You'd think we'd be so good at this after 6 months.
What about now? Is it doing anything? Is there anything? Maybe I might have to end the presentation. 1 second. I may stop the share and end it really for a quick second. Sorry, guys.
Or if you have a link, we can just paste into the chat box too. That might work.
I think it's because I had to honestly change my account information. Like literally I did that. I don't know why I did it right before I went into this, because my password was going to expire. So let's do this really quick. And if this doesn't work, we'll just have you kind of write in the chat if it doesn't work. No. Okay, so it's apparently not going to work for me, which is really frustrating because it just worked. Okay, well, I'm going to reshare the screen and we will just have to do it via chat because it's apparently not going to do what I want it to do. Gotta love technology. So if you guys could write in the question answer, actually that would be easier because then everyone can see it. If you guys want to write in what you feel is your top skill employers look for in candidates, that would be great. Okay. Leadership's definitely a good one. How about anything else? Communication and teamwork, great. Time management, definitely a good one. We got to make sure that we can get the work done that we need to. Experience, I think experience is definitely a good one, and that comes in a lot of different forms. Experience can be really broad. So how do you tie in those experiences into the value of what you've been able to do that's going to be impactful to the organization? Good, awesome. So these are some really
good thing no one said technology skills today, huh?
Technology and I have a love-hate relationship. I've been fighting with my computer all day, so I'm not surprised it's not working for me. So I do apologize. I don't think I can write technology on my resume.
I'm just teasing you.
I know. So those are some awesome skill sets. And one thing that I wanted to showcase is that a lot of the things that you presented are absolutely correct. Those are definitely skills that our employers are looking for. So this is a combination of basically a list that employers nationwide have pulled together to say, these are the things that we want to see on a resume. And our job in the Business Career Center is to make sure that we can share this information with you to say, hey, these are the things they're looking for. Let's make sure we can figure out how you can talk about your experiences to showcase that you've gained these skills. What I really like about all of these top attributes that employers are looking for is you can get them from a multitude of experiences, including your study abroad. But as Vanessa said, you have to really reflect on that experience and say, okay, did I really learn my, did I better my communication skills? How did I actually do that? Can I think of a time when I was able to do that in my study abroad experience? Did I have to have any problems that occurred? I'm sure all of you have, various problems, especially with COVID right now. How did you end up having to go about and solve that problem? And those are the things that you really want to kind of talk about when you're in an interview or at a career fair when you're talking about your study abroad experience. So these, again, are the top attributes that employers are looking for. There's a whole ton of other ones, but these are ones that across the board, as you can see, most employers are looking for. So that number one is problem solving. And I think study abroad fits nicely into that, because you're going to another country and you're going to be immersing yourself into that world, into that culture. Not everything's going to go according to plan. There's going to be issues. So definitely I think you can really tie in problem solving along with your study abroad experience. Okay. So this is, again, just a question to kind of start to think about in your head, to kind of start bringing that together. What experiences or situations have you been in where you think you can really utilize those skills? That's how you can start to frame your study abroad experience within that professional setting. So when you are talking to your friends and your parents and you want to talk about the ski trips that you got to go on or all the places, that's awesome and that's great. But maybe then you have to think about, how do I reframe that experience when I'm talking to a professional versus how do I reframe that conversation when I'm talking to my friends? Because you've gotten lots of different things from that experience, and being able to kind of categorize that is really important. Okay. And then Vanessa, I think this is you.
Yeah, I think so. We were just trying to give you guys some sort of food for thought and ideas as you're trying to think, like, well, geez, how do I show that I have strong work ethics through study abroad? Or how do I show that I have initiative through study abroad? So we just kind of tried to pull a few ideas, and you might be able to come up with more. This isn't necessarily exhaustive. But a lot of times teamwork skills, you're going to be sort of refining those by navigating a homestay, whether it's you and another student or just you and a family. Sort of how do you communicate across cultural differences, but also, of course, language differences. If you were able to do any community engagement projects, I know a lot of programs offer the chance to do some tutoring or to do some volunteer work, and so those are places where you might have sort of a story or an example where you can highlight teamwork skills, internships, sports teams, group projects, etc. So hopefully these kind of, as you go down the list, give you some ideas when you're saying, like, geez, I do really want to highlight flexibility and adaptability because that's something that I don't have good examples from maybe through my involvement on campus, but through study abroad, I should be able to come up with a good example. So where do I start to look at that, and what can I sort of pull into creating a story and a narrative about my flexibility and my adaptability skills. We usually have handouts and just sort of small group discussions for this activity, so I think we're going to kind of try it in a new format here since this is our first time doing this workshop on Zoom. I will send all of you the handouts by email. Actually, if you give me your email address, I'll get these at the end, but I will send you all the handouts later. For now, what we're going to try to do, Sherry's going to sort of explain this activity to you, and then we're going to hopefully have you guys unmute yourselves and maybe have some conversations work together out loud and try to build a story that you can use to highlight some of the different skills that we just talked about. So teamwork, communication, work ethic, leadership, initiative, sort of thinking back to those skills and skills that we listed, sort of build your interview story.
Yeah, so this is a really great way to practice kind of thinking back and reflecting on your experiences and then turning it into a professional skill-based story. Many of you have probably heard of the STAR method, but for those of you who have not, the STAR method is typically seen in interviews, but it is definitely very applicable in other situations and other networking events or other communications with employers. But it's a way to tell your story of a specific experience, of a specific thing that happened, situation in an experience, where you're really able to pull out all of the great things that you were able to do or accomplish or adapt to and showcase what you learned from in that situation. So normally we would have you kind of break up into rooms and we would give you kind of a skill set and you would kind of take some time to break down an experience that you've been able to showcase where you did that skill set using the STAR method. So with the STAR method, you're really going to talk about the situation at hand, the task that you're trying to accomplish, the action steps that you took to get, to achieve the task, the result from the action steps that you took, and then the reflection piece is what did you learn or take away from that experience. That last piece is really important because a lot of times when you're talking about these stories, if you're talking about flexibility or adaptability or problem solving, that typically means something did not go the way it was supposed to go or something went wrong. And so if you necessarily said, I did, X, Y, Z, and I probably should have done A, B, C, saying what you learned from that or what you took away from it shows me that you are able to think critically about how you present yourself and how you do something to be able to grow and move forward and always continually improve. So showcasing that reflection can be really, really valuable. One thing that students do is they tend to focus a little too much on situation and task and not enough on the other three components. So just remember, situation and task is there to just set the stage, and the last three are really all about you. So that's where you want to focus when you're kind of talking about the skill sets developed. So if you're talking about the fact that you developed analytical skills, and the question is, tell me when you developed your analytical skills, remember the situation and task is just so I know what you're talking about. I really want to get the meat of what you were able to do and accomplish. So I think what we're going to try and do is, I think, Vanessa, you have the actual handout. We're going to share that screen. And what we would like for you guys to do is we typically like it in small groups, but since there's only 9 of you, I think we can do this in one large group. If you guys can kind of take a look, we'll pick one as a group and we'll try to develop a STAR-based story to be able to explain maybe a situation that one of you had during one of your study abroad experiences. So Vanessa, I'm going to end my share so that you can share.
Sure, yeah, that works too. I didn't think of that.
So go ahead.
Screen. I was actually just going to try to read out the example that the worksheet had to kind of give an example, but this is even better. All right, so hopefully you see here, oops. Hopefully you can see here this PDF document with the STAR activity, and this is taken actually out of a Study Abroad Organizations webinar handout. And so you can see here the example that they give was a student who was trying to highlight leadership and motivating others as a skill. And so here she tells a story that they were studying abroad in Spain for the summer. They had to work on group projects with local students from Spain as well as American students. They were finding that the Spanish students were working on a different timeline. They weren't completing their assignments at the same sort of pace that the American students were. And so the student said in order to get the assignments completed early enough that they could submit them on time, they decided to sort of really try to build relationships with their local counterparts, go out for coffee, have personal conversations, learn a little bit more about them, show some interest in their individuals, sort of them as individuals. And then once they were able to forge that connection and that relationship, they were able to work much more efficiently as a team. And so that was sort of the result, is that their team team communication improved and their team output improved. And that's really, like Sherry said, kind of the whole point of the story is that you were able to sort of affect this difference by the actions that you took. And so I always kind of like to joke, you want to get to the so what part of the story. Like, okay, so. Anyway, and so normally this handout you can sort of jot down notes on. Of course, here maybe sort of virtually you can just, if you've got pen and paper in front of you and you want to make a few notes, that might be helpful. But otherwise, we're hoping some of you might want to share maybe a story from your study abroad experience and what skill you think that might highlight, and kind of just run through this activity out loud to sort of build an example for others.
And if it helps, we can come up with a skill if you would like us to, unless maybe you guys have a skill in mind, but you can definitely, we can go back to that slide that showcases the skill sets that employers tend to be looking for across the board. So would anyone like to volunteer? I know it's always scary to be the first one.
I'll start playing the Jeopardy music in the background until someone volunteers.
I know this. I will say we definitely feel that, you know, doing this in a small group in person is a little bit easier for you to kind of get into that mode. But I think, you know, if there's anyone that would like to share, I think this is something that, again, Vanessa is going to send to all of you. So I think this is a really great worksheet for all of you to kind of reflect in on your own experiences from study abroad, because you've all done some really great things and they might be different from each other. So I think you're really able to kind of pull in some skill sets, and maybe you could think of like one or two that you would say are very highly developed from this experience. And then you can pull that into an interview or a career fair, or when you're just generally talking to an employer or an alum, things like that. Again, the more you practice it, the more it'll feel more comfortable.
I was just going to say, my biggest advice, I feel like, from personal experience is that, as corny and cheesy as it is, actually practice saying these stories out loud, even if it's just you by yourself in your room in front of a mirror. The more you tell your story and the more you say it out loud, the more refined it will sound, and it will come across as much more polished. And so if you wanted to sort of work on this worksheet on your own and maybe bring it to Sherry, bring it to someone at the Business Career Center, I'm sure that they're happy to work with you on sort of refining some of these interviewing skills. And then, of course, if you have questions and just kind of want to hash out your study abroad experience, I'm always happy to meet with students as well, but I guess I'm a little bit probably less helpful at the career recruitment side of things. So do take advantage of the resources that they have if you wanted to get some feedback on what your story sounds like and what's worth highlighting and what's worth maybe leaving out.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I tend to tell students that you guys do all of the great things. You guys have all of the great experiences and develop the skills. We just kind of help you edit those so that they sound a little more professional and a little more polished for the employer, so that you can really showcase and brand yourself in the way that you want to. All right, so I guess, Vanessa, we'll move on? So if you want to stop.
Sure, I was going to say maybe we can actually share the next activity, which we never get a chance to have time to do. So I think you've got one more slide, and then I can pull up the iCommercial activity too.
Yes. Let me reshare here.
Usually we get carried away with the chit chat and don't have time to get to it.
I know. Okay. So this is also the dreaded question, the tell me about yourself question. This question pops up in lots of different scenarios when you're working with employers, with recruiters. You often hear about it in interviews, but again, also anytime you're really chatting with recruiters, even at networking events, they want to get to know you. So you kind of have to develop this a little bit of like an elevator pitch in a way that really summarizes who you are in a snapshot as a professional, as a student, you know, as someone who's been involved in maybe numerous things and has these great skill sets you've developed from experiences. How do you kind of bring that all together in a little bit of a summary? So this is a really great opportunity for all of you to incorporate your study abroad experience and showcase something that you've been able to gain from that study abroad experience. Because again, saying that you went abroad isn't necessarily as great as saying, why you went abroad and what you gained from that and what you were able to do from that. So the I commercial is a really great way. It was actually adapted by a company, Johnson & Johnson, for you to kind of structure how you can incorporate that study abroad into the tell me about yourself question. So you can maybe say, you know, I feel as though I'm an adventurer, I'm a learner. Because of that, I decided to study abroad in XYZ. While I was there, I was able to enhance my skill sets in. I really enjoyed, you know, ABC while I was studying abroad. And I'm really proud that I got to do this while I was abroad, right? It really provides this summary of what you feel like you are, what you've been able to accomplish, something you've been able to enjoy from it. Because again, we want you to be able to enjoy things. They want people that are going to be passionate and care about the job that they're doing. So if you can showcase the passion and care for something else, they can see you have that ability. And then something that you were proud of that you were able to accomplish. Because again, they want to see that you have accomplishments and that you are able to really be able to articulate those. So I really like this structure because it can really help you showcase how you can really incorporate in that study abroad or really any other experience for that matter.
Yeah, I was just going to joke, of course, we're focusing on study abroad just because that's the point of this workshop, but we assume you have other interests and other activities that you've done in your life.
Yeah,
so don't feel like you have to only talk about study abroad. These are just ideas to give you ways to incorporate study abroad into that sort of elevator pitch, interviewing sort of story, stuff like that.
And that's a very valid point. And realistically, you're going to be talking probably about 3-ish or so experiences that you've had in a lot of these questions. And this just could be one of those things that you talk about. It's obviously not going to be the only focus.
And I was going to share my screen, but in fact, my activity is the exact same chart. It just has an additional box underneath with blank lines for you to fill in your own thoughts. So I'll include that when I email it out to you, but I'm not gonna go ahead and share the screen at this point.
Okay. So in thinking about that, this is just a little bit of showcasing. This is where you're going to be showcasing those skill sets. We're going to be showcasing the experiences that you've had. Your resume is going to be a great one. We're going to show you how you can incorporate study abroad internships that you've done on your resume. Your cover letters, where you can really talk about those holistic skill sets developed while you were studying abroad. LinkedIn, personal websites. Again, we talked a little bit about your elevator pitch and interviews. Definitely going to be highlighting your skills in those, because that interview is where they're basically being tested is, can you articulate the things that you've been able to do and why that was important? So definitely talking about your skill sets in that. And then just general casual conversations. Things get brought up all the time just when you're talking to employers, when you're talking to alum, when you're talking to faculty, and start to be getting into a habit of being able to identify how you can bring in your valuable skill sets so that other people can be aware of that. Because again, if you don't tell them, the employer or the faculty member or the alum, they don't know that you have that skill. You have to provide that information to them. Okay, so in a little bit connection to where do you highlight your skills, down below is just a couple of two ways that you can kind of list this. I made a little addition. It doesn't look correctly formatted because it was an image and I wrote over the image. But if you are doing a study abroad program, you do want to showcase it under your education section. If the time was reduced because you had to leave early for COVID, that's okay to showcase and say. That way, again, if maybe you weren't able to do as much as you wanted to do, or you weren't able to accomplish all of the things that you were hoping to, showcasing that the time was reduced due to COVID just kind of lets the employer know that information. Additionally to that, if you did an internship while you were abroad, if that got reduced, you can indicate that, or if it was canceled, you can also say that, because we did have internships that were canceled, so you could say canceled due to COVID as well. And if it ended up being a virtual internship, because you couldn't actually be abroad while doing it, you can say where it was supposed to be, but then have virtual next to it to showcase that it was actually a virtual experience, but that you still got to work globally with business professionals around the world. Because that really does help for the employer to see that global perspective and being able to see what it's like to work and to at least communicate with business professionals from across the world. You probably didn't really get to see the whole culture of being there. But again, it does highlight some unique things. And again, this year is going to be a weird year, and the employers are being pretty adaptable about all of the situations that may happen. So that's how you can kind of list those in your resume. Within the cover letter, you're really going to be, again, discussing the overarching skill sets that you feel that you develop within the study abroad experience in that middle section. So typically a cover letter, and that first paragraph is why you're interested in them. Well, you're introducing yourself, then you're saying why you're interested in them. The middle paragraph is why should they be interested in you? What experiences have you done and what skill sets have you done that make you a valuable candidate? So this is a prime time, a great time to include study abroad if you'd like to include some of those skill sets you develop there. And then again, networking and interviewing, as we have mentioned before, this is a great way to kind of highlight different skills from study abroad. You just need to make sure you have a clear understanding of what skill sets you want to showcase and you want to share. Because if you're trying to come up with them off the top of your head, sometimes it doesn't come off again as polished, as well spoken. So if you're like, okay, I want to make sure I list off these 3 skill sets, you can have a better conversation to be able to kind of frame the conversation around those skill sets. And as we said before, make sure you do practice. Practice makes perfect, or at least close to perfect. You know, you definitely can tell a difference when someone kind of wings it versus has practiced something before. Okay. So again, some overall tips. You definitely want to make sure you include your study abroad experience, even if it was shortened due to COVID. It needs to be on there. It was a great opportunity. I think it's even a greater opportunity because I think, to be honest, more employers are going to ask you about it. I think they're going to be curious of, oh my gosh, what was that like for you? How did you get through that? Like, even just because of the fact that they knew, like, flights were crazy and all this stuff. So I think they're going to have a genuine interest. And so if you can tie in skill sets to that, it's going to even set you above and beyond even a little bit further. So have on your LinkedIn, your resume, your cover letter, all of the places that you would like to incorporate that. Practice it with your elevator pitch. You don't want your elevator pitch to sound completely rehearsed and like a robot, but you do want to make sure that you practice it so you know the different components you want to incorporate into there. And you can definitely incorporate that study abroad. And then again, making sure that you know how those experiences directly relate to the employer. Meaning, did you do research on the employer? Did you find out what actual skills they're looking for? Did you look in the job description? Does it say what kind of employee they're looking for? What qualifications matter? And are you highlighting those skills and those experiences through all of the different things that you've done, including that study abroad? And then be specific, be prepared to discuss what you've learned, why you learned it, how you learned it, why did it matter, what impact did you have. You always need to make sure that anything that you put on the resume, anything that you talk about, anything you bring up is always game for having to ask for elaboration. So I can always say, tell me more about this. So always be prepared to tell them more about the experience if you've brought it up or if you showcased it. All right. Do we have any questions, or does Vanessa, do you have any last minute things to say?
I can always add last minute things, but I think let's see if anyone has any questions first, and then if you guys want to type, if you've got any questions you want to type into the chat, or if you actually want to unmute yourselves and ask a question, feel free to do whichever you feel. One of the things that I heard once when I was talking to, in fact, Chelsea Keene said there was one of our counterparts who worked in liberal arts was doing a session sort of like this. And she made a comment about how studying abroad and having that cultural shock of living in a foreign country prepared her for moving from the South to the North, and the culture shock that accompanies just kind of different regions in our own country. And so sometimes you think, oh, I'm interviewing, like the company I'm interviewing for is not even an international company. They're only domestic. They only have an office in Harrisburg, like whatever. They're not going to care that I have international experience. But in fact, it's really preparing on a lot of different fronts for navigating different cultures within different office places, sort of generational culture shock, because you're going to be working with people that are not just your generation. And so how do you navigate those differences? I think there's really so many different ways that you can tie this in. And it kind of depends on sort of serendipity and being asked the right question and thinking of it on the spot. But I think you'll find that there's really pretty interesting ways that you can tie in different experiences you've encountered through study abroad into a lot of different questions. So I guess if there are no questions, I will ask if all of you, if you don't want to put it in the general chat, you're welcome to just send it to me privately. But if you want to send to me your email address, I'll send you out all these handouts and activities that we had prepared for you so that you can review them on your own time. And if you have any follow-up.
So Vanessa, I was going to let you know, I actually have all of their email addresses.
Oh, good.
For a webinar,
Okay.
you get all of that data, which is why that's nice.
Oh, perfect.
Email them all that information as long as they had to register with an email address. So we have
Okay,
that.
perfect. So then you don't need to send me anything. We'll just follow up with you. And if you have any follow-up questions, if you think of anything sort of down the road, you're welcome to reach out to either me or Sherry. We're happy to continue this conversation with you, and share this information with any friends you have who maybe couldn't attend today. I'm sure they'll be happy to have a little bit more information as they go into these different career fairs.